Welcome back to another week of the second season NBA. My name is Robin,
My name is Jagger.
and today we're going to talk the NBA Cup Finals. And I think for a number of other reasons, this is a bit of a special episode. This is our first kind of out of studio episode, and the legendary first flu game episode for me. But despite all that, we had a very fun and very exciting NBA Cup this year. Didn't get quite the group stage last night point differential stuff that we were hoping for, but the knockout rounds were unbelievable.
They were
OKC
great.
OKC Spurs was one of the best games we've had all season. This game was also great. We saw the Knicks kind of firing on all cylinders, really looking like a very scary and serious team. And I think that's what we're going to start with today. Really kind of digging into the Knicks, what happened in this last game, and just why they were able to kind of pull it out at the end, and what is making this team such a real threat to win the East.
Yeah, I think even before we get into this game specifically, I would like to reiterate how special these games are that we're getting in the regular season. We can both agree that these are very high level. I would even argue to say like late playoff level of quality of intensity, strategy, talent, and to get all of that culminating in a early December basketball game during what is usually beginning to be the dregs of the regular season when teams start to settle into their standing level and where they're at as a team. So this is really special that we're getting to discuss basketball games in this specific context. And yeah, let's just jump right into this game. This really awesome championship game between the Knicks and the Spurs.
So, the first thing that stood out to me with this game is that I think the Spurs did actually a really good job defending Brunson. I think he didn't get up that many shots. He didn't really get into his like free throw, whip his head back, let the braids go flying game as much as I think he was hoping. But despite that, this kind of new, more diversified Knicks offense, especially from OG Anunoby and Mitchell Robinson, was able to show up and make things difficult for the Spurs.
Absolutely. Um, Off the top of my head, the first thing that I think about when discussing a more muted Brunson game is the Spurs point of attack option. Of course, Steph Castle, who is we've discussed at length about his point of attack ability, but I think him in combination of the tandem of Luke Cornett and Victor Wembanyama on the back line really makes it tough for a pure Brunson spread pick and roll attack. And I think that showed up today. But as you mentioned, the Knicks supporting cast really, really showed up incredibly well.
I thought the Spurs guards, the kind of three or four of Dylan Harper, De'Aaron Fox, Stephon Castle, and Devin Vassell did a really good job of not jumping on Brunson's kind of 2 foot head fakes and ball fakes and kind of pivot throughs. And I think that made it really
Hmm.
difficult for him to kind of get to the normal shots. And there were a couple times where they did start to bite, especially Dylan Harper was the one that I noticed bite a couple of times. And that's when it started to look more like a traditional Brunson performance. And that's all this is to say that the Brunson didn't even have a particularly bad game. But the people that really kind of stood out offensively were OG Anunoby and Mitchell Robinson. And I think the person we want to start with there is OG Anunoby. Because he didn't just stand out offensively, he also stood out defensively. What stood out to you defensively from no, actually. The person we want to start with is OG Anunoby. What stood out to you in his like offensive game? Was it just kind of shot making, or was there more to it than that?
Yeah, so the top of the line, we can't ignore they went 5 of 10 for three. For a relatively dependent player, that's huge if you can hit 50% of your shots. And these aren't shots for OG that are completely wide open, check the win corner threes. These are semi-contested and shots in the flow of the offense, but not necessarily the dare takes. So to go 5 of 10 is huge right off the bat. But he was also, I believe, 5 of 7 from two. And to combine that 3 point catch and shoot ability with the really developed catch and go game that he has now, I think makes him a really threatening offensive option, not just as a maybe fourth or fifth option, but kind of creeping into that second to third territory in terms of offensive effectiveness and in the hierarchy of a larger offense as a whole.
What stood out
So yeah, I think just his well-roundedness is what really popped for me during this game.
what stood out to me with OG in this game and really throughout the last few games with in the during this NBA Cup run was how good of a cutter OG Anunoby has become. And what I think really accentuates that is that there are a number of really, really good cutters on this team. You have him, you have Mitchell Robinson, or not Mitchell Robinson, you have Josh Hart, you have,
Even Mikal is good at getting into open spaces.
and having all these good cutters in this kind of newer system that allows them to cut and has them doing much more kind of off ball action has really opened up more shots, like more like kind of system buckets where they're just kind of running their normal stuff and they just get dunks or layups at the rim.
Yeah, these like system buckets, as it's often described in these analytical circles, has not been a theme of the past Knicks teams. It's been a lot of Jalen Brunson dribbling the ball out at the top, like you said, either trying to get a BS foul with head fakes and braid accentuation. And then if that doesn't work, hopefully one of the Knicks centers can grab the offensive board. And that's they still have that knock heads ability, but like you said, the ability to get these system buckets, cuts, quick decision making, it adds a level of lubrication to this offense that I believe takes them to another level and help them to win this game tonight.
Additionally, I also think it makes it way easier for Brunson because he's also kind of like fit into the system more naturally than I was expecting, where he is willing to do more off-ball movement and kind of get into his drive game and his stuff and his shooting off the dribble or not off the catch and flow more seamlessly than I was initially expecting. I We've seen the Knicks have a very effective offense the past few years through this very like pound the ball, everything goes through Brunson's system.
Hmm.
And I was worried that he might have the kind of we might see what happened with players like James Harden or other like
Westbrook.
Westbrook, other super on ball dominant players when they had to kind of fit into a more free flowing offense where they just didn't quite it wasn't the shots that they were used to getting and they didn't go in at the rate that you'd expect. But that hasn't really happened with Brunson. He's shooting 42% on catch and shoot threes, which is very, very good. And additionally, his drive game is so fundamental and like so solid that he's able to kind of get to the shots that he wants to get from a variety of different starting positions, be it, a very static pick and roll or coming off of pin downs out of the corner. He's just such a solid his foundation offensively and his footwork is so solid that there aren't a lot of positions that you can put him in where he isn't pretty comfortable.
Yeah, he at this point is we're on year 4 or 5 of him producing at this level, and he's a supremely skilled, developed offensive player. And I think I want to go back to what you were saying about his flexibility as an off-ball player because I think it was a very real potential concern with him as a player where he's kind of come up now and developed into this star level of on-ball talent where you're not sure when you bring in more talent what that would look like next to a player like Brunson. And it's been less of what we feared in a potential like James Harden or Westbrook situation and more of what I would think of as like a Mike Conley, where he's able to flow off the ball almost seamlessly. And you mentioned the 42% on catch and shoot numbers, catch and shoot threes this season. That's not on a small sample either. That's on 81 attempts out of almost 200 attempts total. So close to half his shots on 3-pointers this year are coming out of the catch and shoot, and he's taking them comfortably in the flow of the offense, I would say seamlessly.
The other player that really made a mark on this game was Mitchell Robinson. And I think how effective Mitchell Robinson was on the offensive glass shows one of the weaknesses of this Spurs team in its current construction and why this team might still be a couple years away from being like the best team that it's ever going to be. Obviously, they
I
didn't
agree.
have Wemby for the full game, but Mitchell Robinson ended up with 10 offensive rebounds in 18 minutes, which is just an astronomical offensive rebound rate. And when you look at this Spurs team, there aren't really any super dominant defensive rebounders. There are a handful of pretty solid ones. You have the man with the best backup on earth, Luke Cornett, who is a solid defensive rebounder, but isn't some otherworldly defensive rebounder.
No, yeah. And then at the forward positions, there's Harrison Barnes, who throughout his entire career, even in his athletic prime, was known for not being a great defensive rebounder for that kind of 3-4 position. They do have Keldon Johnson, who we think is a relative plus. He only played 15 minutes tonight, though. So I would say just looking up and down the roster, they're really only plus defensive rebounder for their position is Steph Castle, and he's of course a guard, and Mitchell Robinson is 7'2". So
Yeah. So I think that really kind of,
not going to have a huge effect.
and Victor, while he can inhale a lot of rebounds, he isn't exactly the type of rebounder to match up well with someone like Mitchell Robinson, who's just going to kind of bury him and get inside position and not really let Wemby kind of reach up and use his hands to kind of tip it to people or tip it to himself. He just disrupts and kind of can knock Wemby off of his spot and off of off of balance in a way that I think really disrupts Wemby's rebounding.
Exactly. I think the kind of fun analogy that people like to throw around for various things um, is the Chrysler 300 looks like a Rolls Royce Phantom until like the Rolls Royce actually pulls up. And so I think Victor, like you said, kind of the way he tips the ball to himself is he's able to get away with that in a bit like 25 other teams in the NBA. But against these very specialized offensive rebounding teams where there's someone better than him, frankly, physically stronger, has not as much length as him, but comparable. And yeah, when you put all that together, it creates a really tough matchup for Victor on the inside, and we saw that tonight, frankly.
And I think that's very interesting because there are a number of players in the league like that right now that really embody that archetype. And we've talked about a couple of them already this season. You have Steven Adams in the West, you have Jalen Duren in the East, you have Mitchell Robinson also in the East. And so fortunately for them, there is really only one of them in the West, but that is like a real team that could cause some serious problems for Wemby if they end up in a kind of playoff environment, which looks,
Exactly.
fingers crossed. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I think that's a real possibility, and the reason we're discussing it right now, it's not a gimmick where it's we don't see this figuring down the line in a playoff setting. We absolutely do, and that's why it's a point of discussion right now. And yeah, Mitchell Robinson, tough to reiterate, just not only positioning where he was able to get to on the floor, but also out tipping Victor Wembanyama. That's not something that we're going to be able to say very often over the next 15 years or so. So yeah, really, really luminary performance for Mitchell Robinson on the glass.
On the other side of the ball, there were a few other things that really stood out to us. OG, over these past two games especially, has been just unbelievable as a help defender and rim protector. And while he didn't have many blocks or steals this game, there were 4 or 5 possessions at least where he was able to come over and really disrupt someone or make it really difficult get it to even get to the rim, or even once they got to the rim, he would just kind of appear and contest the shot. On like one of the first possessions of the third quarter, OG's the first kind of top defender on the weak side. And we've talked before about how it's very common to kind of have those people raking in and helping. And he does a beautiful job of taking like half a step over and getting right in the way of, let me find out who it was. De'Aaron Fox is on the right side of the floor, drives middle, and OG kind of slides over, disrupts the shot, pokes it away from them. It ends up in kind of a scramble, which resulted in ultimately a really long shot, a really long three from De'Aaron Fox. But that level of get there early, really disruptive, is really important for the Knicks because when they have Cat at the 5, they don't have the rim protection that is really necessary to have kind of an elite defense. So they
Yes,
really,
Cat is at the 5 offensively, but defensively, we've seen for many, many years now he just can't function, and we've hit on this a couple times now throughout the history of this podcast. He cannot function as a defensive center. So having someone like Bam who can slot into that defensive 5 position almost seamlessly is really important. And we think of OG as traditionally a small forward, but he has roughly the same physical measurements as Bam Adebayo with a 7'2" wingspan and a 9-foot standing reach. So he's more than capable from a physical standpoint from defending that position and making those responsibilities. It's just been a matter of the mental side of it. Like you said, getting there early, understanding reads for defense, help responsibilities. And we've seen him over the years develop those skills, which is really, really exciting for him as a continued high level. We say role player, but he's increasingly inching towards a more valuable player, I believe.
Well, I mean, he's paid like a more valuable player right now.
Exactly. And he's starting to produce at that level because the offense has always been shaky in terms of the amount of money he's making. But you're paying for a premier perimeter defender, but now you're also getting close to high level defensive play, and especially in the context of
High level
a
like rim
player next
protection.
to correct next to Cat on defense. I think that it all amounts to a really important player.
So we've talked a lot about the Knicks so far. Let's turn to the Spurs. And the first thing that stood out to me with the Spurs was that this was not the best game from Victor. He was 2 of 6 from 3, but importantly 5 of 11 from 2. And I think especially when he was kind of attacking from the perimeter and creating for himself from 2, it looked pretty ugly.
Yeah, he just um, didn't quite have the touch on a lot of these nail touches that he's had a lot of success on throughout this season, especially. And I think it was a combination of the Knicks being especially physical, another point that we've hit on a lot in defending Victor, and pushing him just a little further than he would like to be off that initial catch. And once he catches, a lot of hands raking down, hands in his face, whether that's from OG, even Cat had a couple of disruptive plays with Victor at the nail trying to create for himself. It never looked good when he put the ball on the floor and tried to create, and then when he tried to just catch out of it, the shots just didn't fall tonight. Which in some ways it's just make or miss league. If those shots go in, we say he had a great game from the 2 point inside the 2 point line, but they didn't fall. So
With Victor not having like the best game, it kind of falls to this triumvirate of guards that we've talked about a lot. And I don't think any of them had a particularly great game. Dylan Harper shot it well from 3, but besides that, had a pretty lackluster game, going 2 of 7 from 2. And despite that, there were some kind of positives that I really took away from this game, especially regarding De'Aaron Fox. I think he did a way better job this game than he has previously of engaging the defense and kind of getting to the rim and putting real pressure on opposing defenses. And I think that shows up with kind of the number of shots he took around the rim. He was only 1 of 3 at the rim, but he drew 3 shooting fouls. And what really stood out was the number of passes that he made from underneath the rim. He had 2 or 3 just really nice kickouts after getting really deep penetration. And that level of just like competent point guard play we haven't quite seen that from him. It's been a lot of these kind of mid-rangers and kind of settling for jumpers, which I'll admit has been
he
going.
frankly has been playing like a point guard. It's been this kind of off ball two guardy bucket getter type of role.
Yeah,
And yeah, to see him with the ball in his hands or without the ball in his hands, pushing the ball up the floor fast, like you said, simply activating the defense to help because he is so quick. Teams are going to have those moments where it's kind of these oh shit moments where they just want to help down at the rim, regardless of who they're guarding. And that created a lot of good open looks tonight. They're not spectacular passes by any means, but simply him making the active decision to put pressure on the rim and not settle for these tough twos in transition and also in the half court. It just created a lot of really good looks for San Antonio. And they didn't necessarily all fall tonight, but it's a very positive step forward for Fox, someone who we've been watching really closely this season and how he integrates with this offense.
I will say what is interesting is that so far this season, his off the dribble shooting has been going really well. He's 33 of 73 from 2 on off the dribble mid range jumpers and 31 of 78 on threes. So he's shooting 45% on mid range or off the dribble twos and nearly 40% on off the dribble threes. And while those are really good numbers, that's not in line with his historical performance, and it isn't really what San Antonio kind of brought him in for, right?
No, yeah.
They want someone who can really kind of engage and use the spacing created from someone as threatening as Victor to attack the basket and generate like elite shots, not just kind of decent shots that go in, right?
Correct. Yes.
Defensively for the Spurs, we touched on a little bit where their defensive rebounding just wasn't where it needed to be. But despite that, we did see the level of rim deterrence that we've come to expect from Victor. And what's so interesting about that is that despite, still having this profound impact on how the Knicks shot the rim, and for example, like the Knicks only shot 17 to 31 at the rim, which is not a particularly high percentage, and ended up taking a ton in that kind of like floater mid-range area of the kind of like short mid-range. And what stands out is that despite that, there were still like a number of times where Victor was making kind of pretty clear mistakes. For example, with a few minutes left in the fourth quarter, Victor overhelped really badly on a drive that I think Castle had pretty bottled up and gave up just a wide
It was
open.
Tyler Kolek driving.
Yeah, it was
Just as
Tyler
another
Kolek
contextual data point.
driving on who's like,
Steph Castle,
yeah,
and he didn't even necessarily get a step on him or anything. He was just kind of meandering down the lane. Castle was still fully in between him and the basket, and Victor guarding OG, who was in the weak side opposite corner, slid all the way down under the basket and just created a wide open shot for OG on what I would describe as a pretty poor threat assessment on Victor's part. Yeah, and so we talked about how it's always, in most cases, better to overhelp than to underhelp. But I think Victor is such a special talent that he can maybe start to think about these situations a little bit more, I don't know, deeply in terms of threat assessment.
yeah, he needs to do a better job of recognizing like what is like the biggest threat here. Like when does he really need to help? And it is I would dramatically prefer him be over helping than under helping because I think it is far easier to kind of rein someone in defensively than it is to inspire more activity from them. But it's really, I don't know, it's fascinating and really exciting for me that we have this like generational might be too small. A truly unique defensive talent who is already having a unique level of impact that is still making mistakes that I fully expect him to be able to clean up.
Yeah, I think I agree. Generational is too light of a term. I think how it's been described in something that I personally subscribe to in terms of the potential impact Victor could have is that he has the possibility to be the most impactful defender since Bill Russell in terms of how much he can affect the game as a defender. So, one of the best defenders of all time, potentially. And we still see a lot that he can improve at. So, it's, like you said, exciting, but also in some ways frustrating because we see how good it can possibly be.
So, is there anything else that you would like to touch on from this game?
Yeah, I think something that's watching a lot of Spurs games this season for obviously a lot of obvious reasons. Um, Stefan Castle's lob game has been something that's caught my eye a number of times, whether it's utilizing Victor's really, really unique vertical catch radius, which is another generational skill of his, but also to his, as we described, the best backup in the league, Luke Cornett. I think just more so than the technical ability of his lob passes, just making the lobs in general. The expected value if these alley-oops connect is basically 100%. So if they happen to get broken up every once in a while, it's not the end of the world. But with Steph Castle specifically, they're not getting broken up very often. And he had three or four this game where I would say the lobs weren't the obvious play, but he still decided to make that pass and they paid off in 100% shots basically at the rim. So Steph Castle, as we've touched on many, many times throughout our podcast, is a very interesting player with a lot of very interesting strengths and weaknesses. And I think his continued development as a passer and specifically these lob passes are something that I'm really intrigued by and going to continue to monitor over the course of this season and his career.
I think what really stands out to me with his lob passing is how early he throws them. A lot of the
That's a great
time,
point. Yeah.
he'll, especially because defenders will often go under the screen on him. And when that happens, he does a good job of kind of engaging both defenders for a moment by really kind of threatening to drive really hard. And that often lets someone with the kind of insane catch radius that Wemby has to get the tiny little bit of space behind them that they need to be able to run into open space and catch lobs. And his chemistry with Wemby and his developing chemistry with Cornette looks just immaculate at times.
Yeah, I would agree. It's just another skill in his repertoire that makes him just continues to be a really effective winning player despite his pretty clear offensive deficiencies, still being able to have that high level impact. Yeah, like you said, I think throwing it early is a great way to put it. He's using the threat not only of his scoring ability, but just his like raw aggression and speed to momentarily activate, like I said, both defenders where their eyes are on him, and then he just throws it up before the obvious lob is even there. But then using the vertical catch radius to capitalize on that. It's a really cool skill, and it definitely pops when it's working well.
One thing that I noticed looking at the box score after the game was no one on San Antonio's played more than 35 minutes, whereas both Brunson and OG went over 40 minutes this game. What did you make of the coaching matchup here? I think we've kind of seen a bit of a trend with older coaches, with older teams being a little more willing to kind of really push for these in-season cup games. And do you think it could have made a difference if Mitch Johnson had decided, I'm going to play De'Aaron Fox 40 minutes, I'm going to play Castle 40 minutes, I'm going to play Vassell 40 minutes?
Um, I mean, I think San Antonio just has a little bit of a deeper 1 through 9 than New York at this point. Like the likes of Jordan Clarkson and Tyler Cole, who had a great game coming off the bench for the Knicks, relative to rookie Dylan Harper, Keldon Johnson, and Champagnie, who we're all really high on. I think I think it just comes down to roster makeup more so than anything else. I think both coaches pushed for this one really hard, in my opinion. And yeah, Fox probably could have played maybe 5 more minutes or so, but I don't think that would have been the difference in this game, at least from what I saw.
So you mentioned Tyler Kolek, who we both thought had a really good game. Where do you think he made his biggest impact tonight? And what does he kind of bring to this Knicks team that really adds value?
So I think just like as a baseline, him as a player, just a very competent professional basketball player. He fits into this role that we kind of make fun of at this point, but this very low turnover to assist ratio, or high turnover to assist to turnover ratio. These like Tyus Jones and Ricky Rubio, Mike Conley, very steady hands with the ball.
Do you see
So
that
I think
level, like that kind of peak from him? Because those are all like starter level players, right? Like high end starters too.
that's the very top end when we discuss this type of player. And I think eventually I see, yeah, like a fill-in starter, very, very high-end third guard for Tyler Kolek, just in his ability to hit shots, make the competent right decision almost every single time. And I think the biggest thing that popped during this game that we'll touch on absolutely is the ability to hold up on defense. What specifically did you see from him on that end of the ball?
I mean, just like an activity level that I think really surprised me, honestly. He never really stopped moving. He was always active in passing lanes as much as he could. He got, when you're that small, you have to be super early on your rotations. And he's not the most athletic guy, but he does have like, he's reasonably quick. And so I think he was doing a very good job of using his quickness to like get to rotations early and then scramble back as fast as he could to get back to where he needed to be. And I think it really helped that this Knicks defense is very disciplined. There aren't a lot of people. It kind of reminds me of it's not as effective of the Mavs defense with Luka's, or the really good Mavericks defense when Luka was on the team, where like they just didn't really make a lot of mistakes. The
I would
rotations
agree.
the
Yeah.
rotations are really clean. The rotations are really early, and that kind of lets you hide people with kind of without quite the necessary physicality or physical traits that you would want to be like an elite NBA defender. And you have to mix that in with some very, very physically talented elite NBA defenders. And they definitely have that between Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, and Mitchell Robinson and Josh Hart. They have some very like athletic and mobile, and they do have like a level of rim protection that they're starting to get to the level of rim protection that you kind of need. And they're doing it a bit of a different. They're doing it a different way than those Mavericks defense with having more wing help and having OG be more of a rim protector, which is really interesting because when OG was first kind of breaking into the NBA and looked like this, premier 3-and-D wing, he was
Perimeter.
he was a perimeter defender. Like he was the go get LeBron every possession, make his life miserable, do it like you're our guy on him.
Yeah, he's talked about how Kawhi has been a big defensive influence for him in his career. Like Kawhi, not known for having the best rim presence, is a premier defender, perimeter defender.
But he's really kind of embraced being more active as a help defender and using his size and athleticism to impact defense on more possessions than he can when he's just guarding one person, let alone when they
Correct.
bring in
And
Mitchell Robinson, who is a very competent NBA center as a rim protector and defender.
absolutely. And then circling all the way back to Kolek as a player, Deuce McBride, who's out right now with an injury, there's a minutes opportunity open for those backup Knicks spots, and it's a lot of Jordan Clarkson, who was up and down during this game, both offensively and defensively, as he's often is. But I think Tyler Kolek taking that opportunity, and I'll reiterate again, just being a competent body who not only can just play the pure Brunson backup minutes, but also slotted in really well next to Brunson in some really high leverage moments of this game, playing at times over Mikal Bridges even. So yeah, he earned the trust of Mike Brown, and I think rightfully so. He had a really nice game.
So now that we've kind of gone through, well, actually, there's one more thing I want to touch on. We did see, and you mentioned Jordan Clarkson a moment ago. They did go the two biggest minutes getters off the bench for the Knicks were Jordan Clarkson and Tyler Kolek, and I don't think they really played a single wing-sized player off the bench. And what's so fascinating about that is that, and what I think really kind of shows a level of understanding of how to build an NBA team that I think the Knicks have really showcased over the past few years is they just went and paid both premier NBA wing 3-and-D guys, right? Like two of the biggest
Mm-hmm.
3-and-D names that were out there were OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges, and they went and just paid them. That skill set, and while they don't fill quite the same role because, no two players are going to be genuinely identical, Mikal Bridges is more the 2-3 and OG Anunoby is more the 3-4, but that skill set is so
Valuable.
not just valuable, but like it's like additive or multiplicative, where like there isn't really too many of those players, right? Players who are great defensively and can get to a little bit of their own shot, who can shoot, who can, do all these things and have like the size to survive and do a variety of different things on defense is just so valuable.
Yeah, man. When we talk about players who are not going to be the primary ball handler, creator, creating shots for themselves and teammates every single time, that next rung down, what type of player are you looking for? And it's almost every single team effectively looking for an OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges. And yeah, the ability for them to essentially, including Josh Hart as well, who is a muted version of this player, to all three of those players just slide between the 2 and the 4. It takes away the need to have to play someone like Gershon Yabusele or, I don't know, dust off whoever the Knicks have deep two-way wing players on their team. They can just play these really high-level players. And yeah, the scalability to guard up and down from shooting guard to power forward, in OG's case, center even too. It, like you said, is a really good understanding of what it takes to win high-level basketball games. And when you have players that can fill multiple roles defensively, you don't have to have your backup small forward or your backup power forward coming off the bench. You can just slide that player up and down, and then that gives you the ability to play higher skill players like Tyler Kolek off the bench, opposed to your traditional backup wing, who is just based on the economics of, like you said, how NBA wings work, is just not going to be very good because of how valuable that position in that skill set is. So yeah, I think that's a great thing to bring up with this Knicks team specifically and how they're built. And again, just another data point for how we think they can be potentially competitive in the playoffs.
What were some of the other like more kind of like long-term takeaways you had from this game?
I think starting with the Spurs, because Knicks won this game. We'll probably talk about them a little bit more. I think thinking about we've talked a lot about the guard triumvirate that the Spurs have, Fox, Harper, Castle. I think as of now, at least having two of those three on the floor at all times is kind of going to be a given for the Spurs.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Victor Wembanyama, who is going to be in every high leverage moment that he's healthy. He's going to be on the floor. You have these two other spots, and right now that's kind of being filled by Harrison Barnes, Champagnie, Keldon, who, as we noted earlier, was his role was really reduced in this game, only 15 minutes.
After a strong preseason and kind of start to the season, he just hasn't really been able to find minutes, which I think makes sense given how good Julian Champagnie and Dylan Harper have been, that they're much more
Exactly, yeah.
willing to just go to all three guards, at which point,
And yeah, you mentioned the potential duplicativity of role players, and Keldon just not quite that level of an off-ball player as a catch and shoot three-point shooter, and then defensively, just not quite at that level to be on the floor for his defense specifically. So that kind of puts him in this gray area of sixth manny type of creator wing player, and with all the offensive creation that the Spurs have,
just don't need
that
that.
just it gets duplicative. So I start to think about what the Spurs could be in upgrading the Harrison Barnes slash Champagnie slash Keldon Johnson role. I think they are good enough right now to where a marginal move like that could potentially be the difference between a playoff win and a playoff loss, at least how I look at it. How do you feel about that kind of concept and idea?
I think if the right player was out there for it to kind of fill that role, it would make a lot of sense. But I think making that move now does have some real risks. I think we could totally get to the playoffs, and when teams are more willing to kind of scheme against Castle and like really commit to just like, hey, we're just gonna put our center on him, and he's gonna go super under everything. It could turn into a
Which
situation.
teams still haven't really been doing, by the way. So, but
I,
yeah,
we
that's
are
a
starting to
possibility.
see some things closer to that. For example, at the beginning of this game, Castle passed it to, or had made a pass to Devin Vassell, kind of coming off of an off ball screen on the wing, kind of curling into the lane. And Hart did a really good job of just going with the ball and raking in really aggressively because Castle just isn't a threat to take that wing jumper, right? Like that's just not a shot that I think anyone feels very threatened by. And he completely disrupted the pass, and I think it ended up in a turnover. And
Okay, yeah, that's a good point.
so we're starting to see some stuff like that, and I think you can take it farther, which is why am a little hesitant to say kind of go for it now, because there could be like it's just a very fine balance to tread, and we
No,
still
yeah, there is the opportunity cost of you're giving up assets for a player right now when you're still not 100% sure what this team is. But we see the potential for it. But there is, yeah, like there is that opportunity cost. I would agree with that.
so I think it's a very fine balance to strike, and I think we didn't speak about him much this game, but like Dylan Harper has looked so good, and his numbers kind of getting to the basket and finishing at the basket are absolutely elite for a rookie, and that makes him just this super intriguing piece that could end up being the best of that group of three guards. And if that's the case, your kind of time frame has been pushed farther back because he is still a rookie. He still does have quite a bit to learn. So I think
Agreed.
it's a very fine balance to walk. And as we get into the trade season the next few weeks, I think it's something that we'll explore a bit more.
I agree. In terms of the Knicks, they have now fallen to 15th defensively, but still second in net rating offense, third total net rating in the league. This is something we've kind of been towing around the concept of the Knicks as a true championship contender in recent weeks. How does this game change any of that or not change any of that? Where do you see for the Knicks right now in terms of their long-term high-level outlook?
I think this is a really, really good Knicks team. I think if you put a gun to my head, I think this would probably be my favorite to come out of the East. But I do think they match up kind of extremely poorly with Oklahoma City. And I think the chances are so high that Oklahoma City is the team coming out of the West that it does kind of really put a damper on on anything. And I feel a little bit differently with a team like Detroit, who would probably your second favorite team to come out of the East, where what Detroit does well is something that can cause problems for OKC. So that kind of matchup sort of quirks is a bit of a downer for the Knicks, I think. But I do think they are like that offense is like genuinely elite. It looks good. It flows really well. It's much more fun to watch than it was last year, which I think is the biggest thing for me.
I would
But
agree. Yeah, the aesthetic value of just simply more ball movement and player movement is a huge bonus.
and if they can figure out something with this defense to kind of keep getting a little bit better, and here, let me take a look at the last 2 weeks where they haven't played that many games, but over the last 2 weeks, they were fifth in defense. And so, if they can keep that level up and really start to, stay in that kind of area, then it starts to be a bit more real. But I do think they have some unique matchup weaknesses with teams like Oklahoma City.
Yeah, I think it comes down to when your two best players are Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns. Defensively, I think it's going to be really, really hard for them to not only during the regular season break that top 10 in terms of defensive net rating, but once they are in the playoffs, we've harped on it at length. Brunson's size combined with Karl Anthony Towns' lack of foot speed and overall defensive ability as a center, it just really, really drags down a playoff defense. And we talked about in this case of Castle how offensive deficiencies get magnified in the playoffs. That goes equally, if not more so, the case for defensive deficiencies in terms of scabs being picked at. And yeah, saying the Knicks are going to be the favorite or your potential favorite to come out of the East, it's not as lofty of a statement as it's been in years past with how level the talent level and distribution of wins has been in the East this season. But yeah, it's still a statement, and I think it's just going to be a wait and see. And I think I agree with you. Whoever comes out of the East is is going to be 1 to 2 tiers below the team that comes out of the West, and that's an issue for much further down the line. But yeah, I think the Knicks are in a normal season, maybe fourth or a fifth seed in a normal divisional hierarchy, which is a second round, maybe a conference finals if they're lucky team. And that's still kind of where I see them, despite their very, very high level offense and at times defensive capability they've shown, like you said, the last 2 weeks, fifth in defensive net rating, can easily be swayed by shooting variance, that type of thing. But it's something to note nonetheless.
On that note, we are very excited about the upcoming trade deadline and trade season now that December 15th is passed. We'll see if the Knicks can kind of come up with any moves. There have been rumblings about Giannis and all that, but those will have to wait for another day. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check us out on Instagram and YouTube for enhanced snippets of the podcast where we add in some video, and I think those are really fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah, just to illustrate what we're audibly saying on this podcast, so it's not just you hearing us read numbers for an hour, something to visually aid what we're saying. So yeah, thank you for listening again, and we'll see you soon.